Hey everybody, welcome back to the Couples Therapist Couch. This is your host Shane Birkel, and today I'm talking with Jill Fischer, who is a certified emotionally focused supervisor and trainer, and is also certified in the Gottman method. And she is the founder and director of the New England Center for Emotionally Focused Therapy. Hey Jill, welcome to the show.
Hi Shane, thank you for having me.
Absolutely, I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. For those who don't know, you're one of the few certified EFT trainers and recently just taught an externship. But why don't you start by telling us a little bit more about yourself and your history with doing this work?
Okay. Well, I've been in the field for about 30 years and, working in various different contexts. But I've been in private practice probably for 20 plus years. And about, I don't know, 12 or so years ago, I got especially interested in couples therapy out of a crisis in my own personal life, my own relationship. And I came across the Gottman research and got very immersed in that and went through the whole Gottman training and certification process. And it was incredibly helpful to make sense of what had gone awry in my own, marriage. And so I was an avid Gottman therapist and jumped right in, and I really enjoyed teaching people these, concepts and using that model. But then I ran into a limitation in certain cases, and in particular, people with trauma. And it was like, okay, this is not doing anything. It was like dropping a pin in the ocean,
Uh-huh.
Mixed metaphor, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And so my Gottman certified therapist, supervisor at the time, he said, I think you should look into this EFT, because he had started the EFT training. And so I did, and went to an externship with Sue and Scott Willie, and it stirred up a lot because it's coming at things from a bottom up rather than a top down sort of place, emotionally bottom up rather than conceptually top down, which the Gottman method is more. And so I struggled for a couple years trying to do both, but that felt like sitting with my couples, like one part of my body was getting pulled one way and the other part was getting pulled the other way. And I finally said, I gotta choose.
Yeah.
So that's when I went and I got more training in EFT, and I've never looked back.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Can you say a few words if there are new therapists out there and they're trying to decide maybe between, doing some more Gottman training or doing some more EFT training?
Yeah.
Anything that would be helpful for them?
Yeah. Well, some of it does depend on personality and temperament.
Mm-hmm.
The thing is, they're both based on incredibly sound research, and that's very complementary. There's no question. They're coming at the same thing, but from a different perspective. And John Gottman and Sue Johnson have, collaborated and have conversations. And but in terms of choosing, here's the thing. So the Gottman method, if you're not super comfortable with emotion and going deep with couples and in yourself, because we have to be able to connect emotionally with the places we're trying to help our couples go. If that's kind of an area that you go, I just can't imagine doing that, EFT may not be a good fit. You can't do it from a distance. The Gottman method, while we use our empathy and, validation and those kinds of things, you can keep a little bit of a distance that you just can't in EFT. And so if you want a more cognitive, approach, Gottman is a good one. EFT really involves sort of immersing yourself in the emotional experience of your couples, which means accessing your own emotional experience so that you can empathize. And it's a very, very powerful way to work with people.
Yeah, and
And
I love what you're saying as far as, and I do think that both models have great respect for each other.
they
And
do.
they both
Hmm.
have a lot to offer.
Yeah.
And but the Gottman method is a lot more about teaching the skills that can be
Yes.
incredibly helpful for some couples
Yes.
who haven't learned them in their families growing up, or for whatever reason they need to apply these skills to improve their relationships in their life.
Yes.
um, but when you particularly when you're dealing with someone with trauma, and I believe all of us have some trauma, no matter how good our families were,
I
um,
agree. Hmm.
that the EFT is really more focused on touching on that deeper stuff. I like the way you said
Yeah.
that, bottom up versus the top down way of thinking about it.
Yes.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
great.
and those skills I've found incredibly helpful just to keep in mind in my own life and my couples. But here's the problem with the skills is that, and this is where EFT comes in the moment of disconnect from the important other, we're designed to have a strong emotional response to that
Hmm.
because our well-being is so linked to feeling connected to another human being, at least one in our world. We're designed to have a strong emotional response that happens much more quickly than our rational brain can keep up with. Like,
Wow.
it takes a hundredth of a second. That is hard to even fathom how long that is, right?
Right.
For us to read a cue that we, perceive in our partner as either dangerous or not, and we default to the negative. We're designed to do that for biological reasons, like that squiggly stick in the path is a snake, not a stick, is our first reaction, right? And so we're designed to have these strong emotional responses that say danger, that then send a signal over to our partner that says danger to them, and all that happens so fast that the skills go out the window.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely.
And so that's where in the FT we're more helping make sense of those danger moments and help people get comfortable with what's happening for them in those moments, and sort of the more vulnerable places that fuel those moments that they're usually not aware of. And that's where the focus is, rather than remembering to use a softened startup or defensiveness, and because that's too heady for us,
Hmm.
to really make a difference.
Yeah, yeah. Especially
Mhm.
imagining some of the couples that we work with, they really need something a little bit more that's going to touch on that reactiveness. Reactivity.
Yes. Yes.
And I love how you mentioned the self as a therapist, because if we haven't done our own work personally,
Yeah.
it's easy for us to get wrapped up in that same emotional stuff that's coming out with our couples.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And our couples do trigger us too. I mean, feelings of inadequacy if they're not, you know, moving along in the way we're, with good intentions wanting them to, or their anger can be overwhelming. I mean, it's natural to have, an emotional response to other people's emotions.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, and I didn't even prepare you for this or anything, but
Mhm.
when you're thinking about when I'm thinking about working with a couple in EFT, what are some of the first things I'm thinking about? And I know there are, I think, 3 phases that
Three
include like
stages.
nine steps or something. And
That's
if
right.
you don't have to go, you don't have to go through it all. But what are
Yeah.
some of the ideas that if I'm first meeting with a couple at the beginning, what are some things in the back of my mind as I'm beginning to work with the couple?
Yeah. First thing that jumps right to my mind, and that top priority, is creating safety,
Hmm.
creating a safe space for the couple to um, get this to be able to explore their emotional experience. Because if we don't feel safe with the therapist, we don't feel like this person really is going to accept us no matter where we are, in terms of how we're struggling, and we don't feel that sense of acceptance and real understanding and getting of what's going on, our brain can't feel safe enough to explore the places that we may not really, be aware of in ourselves. So safety is a huge part, and
Can
and that
I can I ask you to say a little bit more about how do you create that safety as the therapist for couples?
yeah. Um, Part of it is our guiding principle in EFT and any kind of therapy, but on an attachment level, we calm down when we feel understood.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we create this space that says, I want to understand your experience no matter what it is, and we start to, from an EFT perspective, we're listening with an attachment frame, and we start to, just with little things that we say, kind of validate the struggle from a bit of an attachment, from an attachment perspective, not a bit of, an attachment perspective. Of course, I see how you, when you see your partner's anger, you just want to go into this self-protective mode and get away.
Mm-hmm.
Because that anger says what? Help me know what that anger says. It says, I don't like you. What does that anger say to you? So we're kind of helping to understand each person's experience through an attachment lens that starts to make them feel like, oh, okay, I'm not crazy that I want to pull away in the face of this anger, or there's not something wrong with me, or I'm not, the problem. Or for the person who might tend to be the expressive, angry person, it's like you're fighting for a response. That person's so important to you that you're just banging on the door saying, please, please let me in. I mean, that starts to put their problematic behaviors in a context that's all about how important they are to each other.
Mm-hmm.
So right from the first session, people start to go, oh, okay, it's not that we don't love each other. It's that we're so important to each other that we do these things that that make sense but make it worse.
Yeah, well, and I can imagine, when these human beings who come into our office, talk about this with their friends or their family members, a lot of times what they might get is like, oh, well, just be positive. Just don't, you don't feel so bad about it. And,
Yeah.
or, don't be so angry. Don't let it get to you. And it's really dismissive. And what you're talking about is connecting with them and saying, I hear you. I'm taking it in. What you're feeling makes sense.
Yeah.
And that to me feels like a huge difference in the way that most people communicate.
Yes. Yes. And also, I mean, often couples therapy models will be more about trying to solve the problem or create compromise or suggest going on date night or, those kinds of things, which really don't speak to the emotional level of how bad it feels to be disconnected from the person you love and how threatening that is.
Mm-hmm.
And normalizing that, of course, it feels bad because this person's incredibly important to you, so it's going to feel horrible when you get into these bad places. And what you're doing to try to cope with that is normal.
Mm-hmm.
We all do some version of it. And we need to help you understand what's going on in these, what we call key attachment moments on a different level so that you can reach for each other in your distress.
Great. That's a great explanation of that, creating safety. And sorry, I don't know if you remember what you're about to say next, but when I interrupted you, as far as like once you create that sense of safety for the couple, then what are some of the other things you're thinking about as you're beginning that work with them?
So we're our first task in the first phase of the process. You mentioned those 3 stages. So there's 2 main stages, and in stage 1, the main task is for people to get really clear, both people, that they're caught in an interactional pattern That's a self-reinforcing feedback loop.
Mm-hmm.
And what each person does to take care of their heart is a way I love putting it. What do you do when your heart is afraid? To help yourself kind of cope with that distressing moment, because that's what's happening in the separation. It's like what Panksepp calls a primal panic. The person I love is suddenly either unavailable or looking at me like they don't like me,
Mm-hmm.
or like they don't want to be with me, at least
Right.
in this moment, right? And so what does each person do to help themselves in that moment that it throws everybody off balance, and how does that then trigger their partner's distress, which then triggers more of the same of their distress. So again, to use that example, so if my tendency in my moment of disconnect from my husband is to try harder to get through and amp up if I perceive that he's distancing, and my tone starts to get more intense and more, angry, and I, push and prod and nag, some of those things that people do, then my husband, to kind of protect himself from those negative messages he's perceiving from me that come through as critical, starts to sort of either get defensive or withdraw, and that reinforces that I can't reach him. And I do more of what I do, and that makes him do more of what he does. So the couple is in the first phase of the process really getting to know their particular dynamic and owning what they each do, their tendency, their attachment strategy in that moment. Be able to say, when I'm in distress, and so I can start to, I could say, when I start to have all these critical thoughts about my husband, or I start to, that's me, sort of starting to send over these messages that contribute to the dance that are really more about something more vulnerable, that has to do with longing to connect, longing to be reassured I'm important, longing to know that I can reach him, right? But that on the outside, what it looks like is this irritated, critical, sharp-edged kind of behavior. So it's connecting what my more vulnerable attachment fears, or our couple's more vulnerable attachment fears and needs, with what they do to cope that sends over this negative message to their partner, and helping both people do that.
Yeah. So, because I can, sometimes I find myself with couples in the session sort of getting wrapped up in their story, and one partner will say, well, he does this, this, and this. And I'm like, oh yeah. Okay. We got to fix that. And then he's like, but I wouldn't do that if she didn't do this, this, and this. I'm like, oh yeah. Okay. Yeah. We got to do that. And it's hard to stay grounded, but what you're talking about is guiding them to each reflect on their own process and their own stuff that they can own in that situation. Is that right?
Absolutely. So when he does, X, fill in the blank, leaves the sink full of dirty dishes when you've asked him to please wash the dirty dishes. This is just my, Wednesday night clients,
Right.
So when you've asked him nicely and he still leaves it, then what's the message you read about his caring? He doesn't care. He doesn't care. He doesn't care. And that's a painful feeling. The person you most need to care, what you read in those dirty dishes is he doesn't care. And we help them sort of stay with that feeling and connect with that feeling. So not caring, I'm not important, what's important to me isn't important, and how painful it is to have feelings like that with the person you most need to feel important to. So what do you do in that moment where you have that terrible, painful feeling of not feeling important? You tell yourself, this is what this means, he doesn't care. What do you do to try to help yourself with that feeling? And then we get at I go in and I say, again? You haven't done the dishes again? Okay, so when you're feeling unimportant and vulnerable and you're afraid that this is what this means, you'll go back and focus on the dishes. So we're trying to help them shine the flashlight in, but the cue is that thing that they're reading from their partner that triggers these more vulnerable attachment fears, needs, and longings.
Mm-hmm. And what are some examples of how the partner is responding as you're guiding one person through this deeper reflection of themselves?
Well, often they're going, well, I never knew that. I never knew, like this couple I'm talking about with the dishes. He says, I didn't know that's how it felt to you. I thought it was just like, do the dishes? Yeah, okay. But they get dirty, they're more crusty, flies and stuff. And I thought, okay, I don't get to, I didn't know that I was sending this message to you, that you're not important to me. And they kind of, if they they start to tune in on a different level, and the couple starts to talk on a different level. So it's often like, whoa, that's how it feels.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm sure I'm oversimplifying this, but as soon as the partner turns from blame toward the other person to talking about their own experience, it's very disarming for the other partner to hear it in that way.
Absolutely. And, disarming, but they're more receptive.
Right, yes,
Because
yes.
they're not being attacked, they're getting a window into their partner's inner world that the partner hasn't been sharing, that has to do with this very different level of experience, which is about the attachment meaning. That you could, whatever it is, the dishes, the struggles around finances, parenting, it's the attachment meaning that gets, triggers these emotional distress, and it starts to shift the receptiveness and the ability to talk about it.
That's
Yeah.
great. I'm thinking right now about some of the more tangible ways that you're thinking about it as the therapist. Like, how important is it that that partner is talking to you for certain parts of the conversation instead of to their partner? Or how important is it that at some point they turn to their partner? Or how long are you willing to spend with one partner before you even include the other person in it? Or, some of those kinds of things.
Yes. Yeah, that's a really important question, because at what we call enactments in EFT, in other words, turning to your partner and sharing is where the change events occur. So we want that to happen, especially in the second phase of the process. But we don't want them to keep doing what they're doing.
Right, right.
So we might watch them interact in their usual way for a little while to sort of get a feel for how it tends to go. But we don't let that go on too long. I mean, we don't do that a lot. We might do that, in the early phase to try to get, okay. And then I'll stop and say, okay, this is what it looks like at home. Is that right? Yeah. They'll say this. Yep. It gets a lot worse than this, right? So then what I'll do is I'll have each partner talk with me, and I'll say that. So talk with me, stay with me, and I'll help them kind of circle down to another level of the experience, to the attachment meaning, and ask them to share a little bit of that. So I distill what the person's saying with their focus on the other, on the partner, distill it into this attachment level, and then have them pass it over. And so we're very directive that way. And then we sort of go to the other partner. What was it like to hear that from your partner? How was it to hear it that way rather than with the accusation? And we'll, so we do a lot of distilling and then encouraging that passing with a new kind of message.
Yeah, that's good. That's good to hear it that way. But there's a lot of you're very intentional about how you're doing that, and you're very mindful of how that's playing out in the room.
Exactly. Very intentional, very mindful. That's right.
Yeah, that's great. And so we were talking, what is the overview of what stage one consists of then?
Yes. So basically, we call stage one, the goal is de-escalation.
Mm-hmm.
Because by the end of stage one, the system has calmed down, because the couple is really getting on a felt level that the enemy is this pattern that they co-create together. Right? When, they come in pointing fingers at each other.
Mm-hmm.
And then by the end of stage one, they're pointing fingers at the cycle and trying to kind of fight the cycle together.
Yeah.
And so it's each person owning their part in that dance, and owning that they, in their moment of vulnerability, and they're getting a little taste. Sorry.
That's all right.
They're getting a little, taste emotionally of that vulnerability. We dip into it. This is what I do, that, and the other partner same, that where we co-create this dance together. So that's the end of stage one. So they'll come in saying, we caught the cycle, we were able to say, okay, I think we're in it, and interrupt it, but we don't know what to do instead.
Okay, great. Well,
Now
what are the possibilities for how long stage one might take? How many sessions?
Yeah. Well, it really varies, depending on a lot of things, including trauma history and that kind of thing. But it's this is, so we talk about this being a short-term model, short-term being 20 sessions, without some of those mitigating factors that I just spoke of. But about 2/3 of the process happens in that first stage.
Okay.
Yeah, because you can see people, they come in with these well-worn grooves.
Sure.
But it takes a lot of repetition and going back and, addressing the cycle in each person's part, and they're feeling into it deeper and deeper. So most of the time we spend in stage one.
Mm-hmm.
And so then when you start to hear the couple starting to talk with more ownership about their own behaviors, then you're ready to go deeper, which is stage two, is the more intrapsychic, deeper phase of the process.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where we focus more concertedly on one person, and go deeper into their vulnerable fears, attachment fears, and sort of help them to stay in contact with those vulnerable places for longer periods of time, so that they can befriend them in a more active way. And also another part of that process is be able to know what they need in the way of comfort from their partner in that place, so that they can get used to asking for reassurance. Mm-hmm. So for a withdrawer, that might be, I need to know that even if I make a mistake, you still see me as a good person. If I'm flawed or vulnerable, you still love me. Because often withdrawers are really defending against any kind of, making a mistake or missing, their partner, or screwing up or failing is intolerable. So getting more comfortable with coming and saying, I'm afraid I've failed you so terribly you couldn't possibly love me anymore. Because that's how people feel in those moments, right? And same with the pursuer. I'm adding in language of these attachment strategies, pursuers and withdrawers, which we draw on in EFT.
That's
right. But the stage two is going first more deeply with one, and then more deeply with the other, so that they can contact these more vulnerable emotions more reliably, and then help their partner know what they need to feel reassured.
And is talking about family of origin often part of that process?
That's exactly right.
Mm-hmm.
That would be the part where we would help connect their coping strategy with where they learned it,
Great.
And we go into their view of themselves and their view of others as linked to, it makes sense, that given the context you grew up in.
Yeah, that's something that I find to be so helpful. You're taking the blame off of them by by saying that anybody who would have gone through this would be, or it makes perfect sense that you would be reacting this way after growing up in your family.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's a relief for both people, right?
Right. And it's very hopeful. It's
Mm-hmm.
the idea that once you begin to learn how to identify your own emotions and what's going on for you in these moments, that
Yeah.
I can teach you a new way. I can show you how to make this work better.
Yes.
It's simply that you haven't learned yet, and I have a
Yeah.
path for you to learn.
Yes. How would you know how to reach for comfort if no one was ever there for you,
Mhm.
to comfort you? Of course, you learn to just sort of figure things out on your own, right? So we validate where that strategy comes from, and then we help them plant the seed for another possibility. Yeah.
That's great. This is one of the best overall overviews of EFT I've heard. This is really helpful.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Good.
What else would be important to consider um, as we're thinking about how to guide a couple through the process of therapy using the EFT model?
Uh-huh. Um, well, I touched on this without describing much, this pursuer and withdrawer terminology. That
Mhm.
um, so we we have a couple of what I like to call EFT flashlights, right? So when we go into this, like the tangled woods
Uh-huh.
of a couple, what are we shining our flashlight on, right? And so one of them I've already talked about. We know that everyone is hardwired to have this need and longing to feel securely connected to another human being, and that's in there, And if a couple, still wants that with each other, but is in high distress, we don't focus on the distress. The distress says, actually is a reflection of how important they are to each other. Occasionally you'll get a couple where one person has really burned out and has really decided they don't want the relationship. And then we have to assess that if are they just terribly hurt and there's still room to reconnect, or are they just here to get out of the relationship? We have to sort of tease that out. But on the
Yeah.
whole, most people who come in because they're in terrible distress, and it's because they really want a secure relationship, and it's painful. So that's one of our flashlights. And another one is, we know that there's only a couple things we humans do
Mm-hmm.
in our moment of distress to cope. And one of them is that amping up pursuer, what we call pursuing for connection,
Mm-hmm.
and trying harder and turning up the heat. Some response is better than no response. I will make you respond to me.
Mm-hmm.
An angry snapping back is better than just a calm, rational, distant or completely moving away response, right? And then the other main strategy is to do that, to try to calm things down, try to distance, try to not make it worse, try not to rock the boat. And it's both trying to protect the connection, but it's also sort of protecting myself from what feels like a lot of heat, right? Coming.
Yeah.
And so we keep those attachment strategies in mind as we're exploring that, and we know something about those different strategies that we kind of hold in our awareness as we offer the space for couples to explore for themselves. We don't impose these things, but we invite, through our questioning and our responses and our conjectures, we invite what we kind of have a sense of what might be going on in there that the couple doesn't know on this attachment level.
Mm-hmm.
So
That's great.
that's another EFT attachment. Flashlight that in the dark.
Yeah. Yeah. And what would give you the indication that couples are ready to, move on from therapy?
Yeah,
They're in a place of health.
yeah. When And I'll say that to a couple because they'll ask that, when do we graduate? When would you say, what are we really aiming for? And it's a transparent model. So at any point, happy to tell couples, this is what we're doing and why we're doing it and where we're going. And where we're going is when you can reliably interrupt the cycle, or, sometimes we can't expect to interrupt it. It just happens so fast, we're both spit out the other side. And then we come back and have a better conversation. Have a conversation where we really both talk on a different level and feel soothed and reassured in these vulnerable places that are fueling the negative dance. And we feel more connected than ever, it's like reestablish the bond. And you can do that reliably, then you're good. Don't need me anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And they can do that reliably outside of the session. Right.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
That's a difference. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah. And that's such a good overview. And I'm curious, could you talk a little bit about the process for, if there are therapists out there who are thinking more about doing some more EFT training, what is the extent of the externship? Or, and then once you do that, you also have to do core skills training. Is that what it's called, or something like that? Or that would be helpful, I think, for listeners to hear about.
Okay. The externship is the first phase of the learning process. It's 4 days, and it moves you through the model. And then the next people can come out of the externship and certainly apply the skills. Usually what happens is people come out, they do it for a while and realize, oh, I need more. I need more help here. Varies on how long that, for a given individual, how soon they would go back for core skills. But then core skills is 4 weekends, generally like 4 day-and-a-half weekends, generally about a month apart or so, that each weekend of which focuses on a different phase of the model. So it's going deeper in a more focused way. And then to get certified, you need 8 hours of supervision beyond the core skills. Actually, it can start during the core skills. It doesn't have to be after, but 8 hours of supervision. And then you have to videotape, submit a videotape of the 2 phases of the process, stage 1 and stage 2, a 20-minute clip of each that show you helping a couple get that interactive pattern that I talked about, and then that show you helping one member of the couple go deeper and more vulnerably and share with their partner in that stage 2 part of the process. And you submit that to the ICEFT, the International Center for Excellence in EFT, and there's a couple people there who review it, and then if you pass, you're in. You're certified.
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah. And you were saying something about the externship and was it that there's a process for self as a therapist through that or something?
Well, this has been my observation as a trainer, that there's a kind of a parallel learning process to what we do with our couples, and I actually talk about it in the training because I could, there's a lot of similarities. But couples, therapists come in, with the externship, they don't necessarily know what they're getting into, and we start to put in a lot of this attachment videos and language, and they're kind of stirred up.
Sure.
And I know for myself, when I went through my externship, I was very stirred up. I'd left my kid at home, and he'd had surgery, and all his guilt. I mean, I was like,
Right.
It brings up your own emotional, attachment system. It's designed to do that, but people are often kind of irritable at that point, and then as we move through the 4 days, they start to kind of calm down.
Uh-huh.
And we're actually helping them go deeper with a model that then they start to go deeper in themselves. So by the fourth day, it's like this soft, squishy group. So the
Uh-huh.
first day is like, I've come to expect this. The first day, there's sort of a level of agitation. People are in their heads. They're asking all these questions, sort of challenging. By day 3, they're starting to integrate this powerful stuff that just speaks to everybody, because we're not all that, we all have these universal attachment fears, needs, and longings, and we're normalizing that, right?
Right.
And so they start to calm down, and they're doing role plays where they're, working with each other and immersing in these emotional places in a role play context. And so by the fourth day, people kind of have a felt sense of that shift in themselves that we're also helping couples do in the therapy room.
I love that. That sounds wonderful. And I think it's so important, and you were talking about this at the beginning, that, well, you didn't say this exactly, but I think that we can only take couples as far as we've done our own work for ourselves on,
Yeah. Yeah.
that we are going to be influenced by their triggers, their attachment triggers, or whatever's coming up for them emotionally in the room.
Yes.
And the more work we do on ourselves, I think the better therapist we can become.
Absolutely. And I also wanted to, when your question about which route would you take, I wouldn't want to discourage anyone from taking the EFT route if, there's kind of this discomfort with emotions. I mean, what people tend to find, because people come in with a whole range, in terms of the trainings in terms of attachment strategies, there are a lot of withdrawals, a lot of pursuit. I mean, we're, sort of fall out one or the other, right? Tend to. But it's a beautiful context. This work is a beautiful context in which to learn about ourselves. It's very rich that way. So I just came from Jim Thomas, who's the Colorado trainer, did a 2-day training on withdrawal re-engagement. And he starts by having all of us get in touch with our own withdrawer. I mean, I'm a pursuer, but I definitely have that part of me that's, feels like I fail, I'm incompetent, those kinds of terrible places that we all go at times, right? And so everyone comes away from these kind of trainings both with a lot of great clinical, learning, but also we're constantly learning about ourselves in a really deep way. So people come in, with a certain amount of discomfort, but also this kind of longing to get close to something that's, when we are close to it, we feel reassured as humans, So it does tend to, in my therapy room, it tends to speak to everyone from, the janitor to the CEO, because this is all in our nervous systems, together, these longings and needs. Just same in the therapy training. People tend to go, "Ooh, I want that," Now, there are exceptions. I'm not saying that's true of everybody, but they tend to go, "Ooh, that," because something in them says, I want to feel that kind of connection with my loved ones and, feel accepted in these ways. So it's a powerful model that way.
Yeah, I love that.
Mm-hmm.
And it helps you build confidence in the room as the therapist, but I imagine it also just helps you feel more connected to the struggles that the people that you're working with are going through. And that is going to make them feel so much more comfortable and safe in the process.
Yes, absolutely. That's so true. You just captured it right there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. Any last words before we wrap it up for today?
I don't think so. I think I've shared everything I can think of for the moment.
Yeah, well, that was fantastic. Such a great conversation. Thank you so much, Jill.
Okay, you're welcome,
And
Shane.
hopefully we can catch up again. I didn't even mention we're both in New Hampshire
Oh,
So hopefully you and I can catch up in person at some point in the future.
that would be great. I'd love that.
All right. Take care.
Okay, you too.
Bye.
Bye.